In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. Today's guest is a seasoned cybersecurity executive with a strong sales leadership and go-to-market strategy background. Before co-founding his current company, he served as VP of Revenue at Ort, which Cisco later acquired. He's also held multiple other go-to-market leadership roles in and around the cybersecurity sector, including Rapid7 and VMware Carbon Black. His current company specializes in simplifying security data management through a unified platform that integrates and processes data from various sources. He is the co-founder and CEO of Realm Security. Pete Barton, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
It's great to have you. And I know you're in the early stages of building Realm. And one of the things that stood out to me from our last discussion was really like how intentional you are in applying lessons you've learned from past experiences to what you're doing here and kind of how you're going about that. So I wanted to start by asking you if you can talk a little bit about what some of those areas are and kind of how you're using that to shape Realm.
Yeah, totally. So I think it's like all experiences are different, but you can often find patterns and similarities, in situations or challenges or opportunities. And so just for reference, I've been doing cybersecurity startups for about 15 years, plenty of different scales, going from 0 to 1 million or going from 5 to 10 or, moving toward an IPO. And I think there's a couple common beliefs, which is a company is a collection of people and everybody brings their own experiences to the company. And I think often in the early days, meeting people where they are and helping them, get you to where you need to go through empathy and understanding of each other, I think is like a high level theme.
Great. And can you talk a little bit more? I don't know if you have any examples behind that or just kind of what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think like early stage tech is always changing, and that's half the fun of it, right? Like there's always something new, and nothing tomorrow is the same as yesterday. But I think as humans, we have a predisposition to categorize things as good or bad, and I think trying to remain grounded in nothing being good or bad, or and just giving it the space to be. And so an example of that would be when I was at Carbon Black and we were transitioning toward an IPO and trying to get more predictability and process around sales, that often takes shape in form of friction because sales teams need to be more predictable. There's a little bit more process. It can take longer to get quotes and things like that. And I think one of the things that the leaders that I learned from did a great job of was explaining the why of like why we're going through this. Because I think anybody can get behind change as long as they understand why it's the best thing for everybody. And I often see the disconnect of, things changing and not really understanding the bigger picture of like why it's needed and how it's a part of everybody's journey, not just the company.
Yeah. And so clearly like having good communications around that is important. How do you think about like internal communications in general and knowing now you're kind of on the earlier stage of the startup life cycle? What does that look like in your organization?
Yeah, I mean, we're a pretty tight-knit group. There's about 15 of us. I think the one focus that I have is just trying to be extremely vulnerable. And when it's the more you learn, the less you know. And so I think the thing is, it's a fine balance, right? Because you need to lead and have confidence and have the team believe in what you're doing. But when you don't know something, just saying you don't know. Because often that helps others understand how they can help you. And if they know where your gaps are, they can very quickly help you fill those gaps. And so an anecdote would be, we're trying to figure out roadmap. and we're trying to plan what we want to build for the next 6 months. But the reality is from a pipeline perspective, we might only have visibility, through a handful of customers. But you're trying to think of like, what are those next batch of features that are really going to help us drive product market fit and continue to grow? And so, I think representing decisions as educated assumptions as opposed to like pure fact, data-driven decisions can make people uncomfortable. But if it's the truth, it's the truth. And so I'm trying to just stay vulnerable and just be honest with everybody on the team because it creates an environment where others are okay being wrong or others are okay being candid. And I think the thing that it's helped us do is just eliminate surprises because we're all just very honest with ourselves on what's an educated assumption versus a fact-based decision.
Yeah. I might come back to this concept of vulnerability because I think it's a very interesting one. But you just mentioned product market fit. So wanted to hear a little bit more from you, just, how you're thinking about that with where you are currently and what are kind of some of those motions that are helping you there.
Yeah, I mean, early in my career, I think I viewed product market fit as more of like an arrival and a point in time of like, oh, great, we have product market fit. But like in reality, it's a spectrum. And so, there's a big difference from having founder market fit where, you as a founder can find a customer, share the vision, get them excited, have them become a customer. Like that's a very different go-to-market motion than having, a sales team and trying to find non-friendlies and bring them in, into the company as a customer. And so for us, I think it really depends on the market. We're not necessarily innovating and creating a new market. We're more of a fast follower. And so I think for us, what we've tried to do is understand what our competition has done effectively, and then to the best extent, leverage AI to very much streamline the onboarding, streamline the effectiveness of the technology relative to how much effort the customer needs to put in to get value out of the product. And so, I think it's like, what is the market already dictated as a need? And then where can we find opportunities to leverage the latest and greatest infrastructure to, deliver a better experience?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that kind of phase of being in that fast follower does have certain elements to it. Like you said, kind of best in class execution. I think that focus on differentiation, right, is really, we know there's a product market fit here. We know others are kind of in the space now. Kind of where's our place to play, right?
Exactly.
I'm looking at
Exactly.
that. How do you think your sales background impacts you in kind of some of this early decision making differently than, say, maybe like a technical co-founder?
Um, it's I think there's a serious level of discomfort that I went through initially because when you're in like the stealth mode or like the ideation or creation of technology, like there aren't measurable metrics, like how many customers, what's the ARR. And so, I think for me, just like being candid, like it was a super uncomfortable 18 months because there wasn't these measurable metrics that you could like, kick your feet up at night and be like, oh, I did, I emptied the bucket, did a great job. And so I think on a personal level, um, that was something to get over. But I think very fortunate to have two co-founders that I've worked with previously. Um, and they specialize in software development, big data, distributed systems. And so I think my sales and go-to-market experience has been more just additive in helping get customers around us in the creation phase to make sure we really have the pulse of the customer as we're deciding what to build. Um, and so I think like the first 18 months was like they were shining, they were doing what they do, and I was just trying to be a participant and getting as many people around us and getting as much feedback on like the capabilities and what features of the product would really drive adoption. And so I think honestly, it's just being able to go and tell a half-built story, but still have confidence, and drive enthusiasm around what we're doing.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting point that you bring up around kind of the unpredictability of pipeline and all of that at the early stages. And I think like in larger organizations, there is at least because of the volume and across different reps and all of that, looking at the pipeline as kind of an aggregate. I think in an early stage company or where it's kind of the founder doing the selling, it feels harder to predict. And so I think there is a little element of kind of being more comfortable with the discomfort, but also then I think a future empathy with the sales reps as you bring that into the organization, kind of how much of a moving target it can be around some of these.
Yeah, I mean, like when when you have a limited pipeline and you don't, you lose one deal, you don't have a bunch to make it up. And then you also have no data on conversion rates and like sales cycles and timing. And so, yeah, a lot of it's just kind of like staying super communicative with everybody involved because it changes week to week.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a specific notion of where your go-to-market will head as far as kind of the sales model? What are kind of those future hires, or is that something you're still kind of working through?
Yeah, it's given I have a go-to-market background, it's a little embarrassing to say this, but I think the world is changing so quickly, and how customers choose to engage with vendors is rapidly changing because of AI, the amount of noise, and just how people want to consume information is so different that I'd say I definitely don't have it figured out, but have a few core beliefs and just trying to investigate, potential new options. I think the number one thing is I'm seeing from other peers that the return on investment for lead gen is changing dramatically, um, given the noise and given how easy it is to publish content and target potential ICP customers. So I think that's the number one question is like top of the funnel, is really, I think what I'm trying to learn as much as I can from others.
Yeah. Well, and I completely agree. I mean, we are living in a time when all of this is changing so fast, and there's the pressures of kind of the outside world, the ease of creating kind of content, the ease of creating companies, right? So all of that is creating just more competition, more noise, and harder to stand out. I think a lot of organizations haven't yet come to terms with the fact that that ROI calculation needs to look different, that some of the tactics are different, that as kind of younger people are now decision makers, that they have different expectations around kind of that digital experience and how they can kind of engage with your company and the amount of information they can get without necessarily having to kind of fill out a form and share their information. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I mean, I heard from another marketing leader that a lot of companies are seeing like a 30% drop in search from traditional venues like Google and other search engines, given the use of, just like any of these AI models. So, there's so much opportunity that it's a positive thing, but it really just puts pressure on, um, staying humble, keeping your eyes open, and realizing that it's moving fast. So, interesting to hear that you're feeling the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. When I was actually at a CEO roundtable dinner that we hosted recently, and one of the topics that came up was around kind of search and how that's looking different for different organizations. Um, I had recently heard that Google has dropped below 90% market share for the first time in
Oh,
20, 25 years. I don't know the exact number, but most of that really coming from the LLMs. And so that can feel scary to organizations. On the flip side, if you're doing things right and you're putting out kind of the right kind of quality content and all of that, you should just see a shift in where the traffic is coming from. And like for our own business, for a number of our clients, we're getting kind of leads from the LLMs.
mm,
And I think it's a little bit, at least right now, harder to game the system, right? So you're making it in there because you truly do have good content and people are engaging with it and it's long form. And so all that kind of old, like black hat, like search marketing things of years past are hopefully in the rear view.
well, it sounds like we have a potential side conversation to have. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, yeah, definitely a lot of changes there. Curious, before we move on to another topic, are there any other kind of lessons learned from just your experience to date in your career that are shaping how you're thinking about Realm?
I think the most interesting thing that I see as an opportunity is how do you continue to drive like interconnection between the different aspects of the company And obviously it gets way more challenging as the company gets bigger because when it's like 15 people and you can get everyone on a Zoom and have a conversation, that's easy. But every single aspect of the company has different objectives and different goals. And I think over my career, I've seen the barriers, differences in communication between those groups, driving misalignment and making it harder to move quickly and be nimble. So I think that's the one thing I'm always trying to figure out is like, how do you continue to have that empathy across the company for each other? Because, everybody makes a decision that's going to inevitably impact somebody else in the company. And so how do you short circuit the need to communicate once, an opportunity was missed? So I think that's one thing. Um, I think the other thing is, like this is specific to cybersecurity, but there's been a big disconnect between perceived value of buying software and then realized value. And so I think like you can kind of get by and just execute your way, in the early innings to, 1, 5, 10 million ARR. But to very quickly go from, 1 to 50, um, creating raving fans based on your ability to actually get people to realized value quickly, I think is not something we figured out by any means, but I think it's like one of the key goals. And like the AI topic is a perfect example of what we can maybe do differently, which is how do you take what were previously manual, time intensive, inconsistent exercises amongst your customer and use AI to remove them from needing to worry about a lot of the nitty gritty aspects of configuration, management, deployment, and just create a better experience that, hopefully results in somebody wanting to tell a peer. It's like, hey, I just used this solution and like legitimately did what I purchased it to do, which sounds like table stakes, but I think in security, given how complex of a market it is, there's a lot of fatigue on like maintenance and management of software. So um, I know your question was like, what have you learned from the past? Um, and I wouldn't say that I actually like learned how to solve the problems. I just have an idea of what problems we should focus on. So the jury's still out on those
Which
stuff.
I think is the most important part of the battle, right? Is recognizing here's something I want to make sure I'm doing differently, or I'm holding us to kind of a certain standard. Because then that is right what you communicate to the team and all the people involved in kind of solving that or figuring out how do we kind of do things differently and kind of truly, um, address it in the way we believe it needs to be. That's the starting point you need.
100%. Exactly.
So I'm curious, Pete. Sound like a very intentional person in how you kind of think about all of these things. Can you talk a little bit about your leadership style and maybe some of the things that have shaped that?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, I'm in the grand scheme of things like pretty early in my career. And so by definition, I have a lot to learn. And that's just something I try to bring every day as an attitude that I hope, you know, um, passes through the team and kind of everyone feels comfortable, being honest about what they don't know, because there's so much that I don't know. And so, and the truth is like, we all don't know so much because the world is changing that what we knew about yesterday is not going to be true for today. So I think from a leadership style, I've talked about being vulnerable. I think that's a huge part of it. I think the other thing is like having been a go-to-market person, and having been more customer facing, I'm very much a people person. And so, I think less about, and for good, better, and different, I think less about measuring things, data, and like data is good to make decisions and data is important to enforce what to do and what not to do. But I look at it more as just a people business. And, I think everybody has different things going on in their life when you're trying to build and run a remote company. You have much less indicators and ability to get feedback from people and how they're doing, how they're feeling. So I think just like continually trying to have a relationship with everybody, to not necessarily understand what they're doing for the company, but just to understand like what their goals are personally, what they're dealing with personally, because inevitably when you talk about a goal or an objective for the company, what people are going through and what people are dealing with in their personal life is going to in some way be a byproduct of that output and how effectively we reach those goals. So I mean, honestly, I'm just a people person. Like I try to get to know everybody on a personal level and hopefully help them get to know me on a personal level. And I think that helps keep everybody aligned and realizing like there's a bunch of empathy for each other.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is one of those areas that you can do more organically. I think as you're smaller, and then it's figuring out how do you keep that as you grow. I was talking to a CEO that had grown from, I think, 50 employees to a few hundred in a matter of 2 years, and no main location, different staff, different multiple countries, and they really had to put something that felt very kind of overly engineered to feel like they were getting that kind of social interaction and dynamic and getting to know one another. But that it ended up like working wonders for them because it gave them the mechanism, the consistent cadences of kind of those team events and different department meetings and company wide meetings, and kind of finding that right balance of when to meet face to face, how to kind of drive those kind of interactions virtually. So it's one of those areas that I think is important, and recognizing that it looks different at those different stages.
Totally, totally. When I was at Rapid Seven, they had this concept called Inside Coffee, where they would basically, just pay for you to get coffee and maybe breakfast with a peer, and they typically try and enthuse you to meet with people outside of your department or outside of your function. And I just thought it was, it's not a small thing in terms of the meaning and impact of it, but it's just a little thing that I think helped a lot scaling and growing that company because there were a few thousand employees, and so just trying to get people to want to like spend time with others that they might not traditionally interact with, I think was super smart.
Yeah, yeah. Agreed completely. I wanted to catch a little bit more about this vulnerability piece because I too kind of believe that that's important in general, but like for my own leadership. And I do find there's a balance between um, right, the level of confidence you need to kind of go in and instilling confidence in the rest of the team, but also that vulnerability, and none of us knows everything. And so I guess how do you strike that balance for yourself? And does it just come naturally, or is it something you're kind of aware of, kind of what you're projecting?
Yeah, it's a really simple reason to be vulnerable in it. I think it revolves around avoiding assumptions, not from the stance of you always have the information to make the decision, but more so from when you do make an assumptive decision, agreeing it's all assumptive, like saying like this is the assumption. We could be wrong, but let's just not lie to ourselves around if it's an assumption or a fact. And so I think I think that's like the general thesis of like trying to be vulnerable. I think the other part of it is when you're in an environment where people need to always be confident and always need to have the answer, um, it can lead to a lot of wasted time developing strategy and executing strategy, which you inevitably need to change. And so, I mean, it's just super relevant for early stage, right? Because you're just always iterating, you're always trying to do different things. And the second you find out that it wasn't the right decision, it's okay. You just iterate. And so I think that vulnerability is really like important in the early days. And, as you grow and you need to have more of a kind of like longer term vision, and you need to kind of inspire confidence and make everybody feel like you're taking the right hill and the strategy is sound. Like that might change, and you might need to be a different type of leader. But when you're 15 people and you interact every day, just being honest, like I this is what I think, and this is my assumption. But like, what do you think? And so that's really the reason I try and be vulnerable. I mean, the other thing is first time CEO, first time founder, and like that's the truth. Like I don't know a lot, but I find that um, people are willing to follow you and buy into the strategy, given you're being honest about it. And so yeah, I don't know. It sounds like it's something that's also important for you and your leadership style. So I'm not sure if you have other thoughts on that as well.
Um, yeah, I think the atmosphere that it creates, I think, is more collaborative environment, creates permission for others to not know. And I think back to the point we were talking about of we're living in a time when so much is changing. I think different each person brings different things to the table, and so making it clear, kind of here's where I feel kind of I'm strong here. Here's why I want to lean on others on the team. Here's where I'm developing myself. And for us, like one of our values is kind of always be learning and kind of a natural curiosity. And so
Mm,
with that, I think you have to have the assumption that, you don't know everything and you're kind of pulling in the right information, the right resources, but that ultimately, like all of that needs to be built across the organization and not that the information like all sits with one person. I will say it's something that, earlier in my career, I maybe wasn't okay showing as much vulnerability. And especially as a relatively young manager when I was in a corporate environment, managing people older than me. And with that, I felt like I needed to kind of posture in a certain way. And so it was a relief kind of over the years to bring kind of more and more of my authentic self and showing the confidence, but also kind of the vulnerability.
yeah, really well put. Yeah, I mean, I think like as you advance in your career and you reflect back on your, earlier kind of time in working in businesses, back in the day, like you're like, oh, these people really have it figured out, and like they really know like what they're doing, and like this is really impressive. And then when you progress and learn, you're like, wow, no one knows what they're doing. They're just trying to do their best. And so it's it's there's like fake it till you make it because that's important. But then at a certain point in time, it's um there is strength in showing weakness for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think the fake it till you make it, before you realize it, you've made it, right? And so it's kind of that mental model. I think the data shows that, roughly 75% of executives feel imposter syndrome, right? So it's so much more common than it isn't, but not everybody talks about it.
Totally. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I'd love to shift gears a bit, Pete, and talk a little bit more on the go-to-market side, and just see if there's anything that you believe is kind of most important to get right on the go-to-market side, especially kind of in that kind of early stage motion.
Yeah. When you're early, there's hopefully a lot of market. It obviously depends on the TAM and what you're going after, but being really intentional and focused on what your ideal customer profile is, the size of the organization, who within the organization you believe would benefit from your solution, um, is important. I think the thing is like once you find somebody who has an interest in what you're doing, even if they're outside of your ICP, it's exciting, right? Like somebody's like, oh, this is great. Like I believe in this. But if you yourself know that like once you get, maybe into a proof of concept, or even if, they become a customer and you're going to inevitably need to build something that the rest of your customers won't benefit from. I think that's hard because like as a salesperson, you're like, oh, this is great. Like, we have a customer and this is my job to find customers. But I think in the early innings, it's finding a customer that looks the same as your other customers because there is a real like drag on engineering if engineering needs to go and like build a snowflake that the rest of your customers won't benefit from. I think that's been the one thing that like the people that I view as mentors have tried to share with me and help me kind of learn along the way.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking of an example. I was talking to another founder that's just, exited another business and is now kind of brand new in his new organization with, an MVP of their product. And they had someone in their network that was kind of one of the Fortune 100s in their space, though their initial go-to-market was intended to be kind of more kind of mid-market.
Mm,
And surprisingly, they got interest from the Fortune 100. And so it created this dynamic for them of, do we take this? And then knowing it's going to put a lot of our like product requirements and a lot more resources and all of that. But such an amazing kind of name to have as a flagship customer. Um, and kind of do you shift your go-to-market strategy so quickly, so early on, or do you stay true and kind of have faith that your initial kind of gut was right about the way to go to market?
that's so hard, right? Because it's a great brand, great logo, great story, but if 6, 12 months down the road, you're going to pay for it as far as, detracting from your roadmap or not advancing the product. It's a hard decision. But it is very hard as a salesperson to like think about saying no to a customer.
Right.
But It's
Well, and when you're the salesperson and the founder, it's a different set of considerations and thinking, do we walk away from this business, both the name and the revenue, uh, so that we're continuing on our path, or does this maybe bring a new opportunity to us
totally.
that'll set us on a different trajectory?
When it's like, it's like, okay, it's great. Like, let's put my salesperson hat on, like, oh, we got a customer. That's awesome. But it's that empathy for engineering, right? Because that customer is going to need things that if none of your other customers have needed it, it's going to put drag on them. And so, yeah, no, it's a balance. It's definitely hard.
Yeah, I'm curious. Just how do you think of capital in your business, and again tied to these decisions around kind of finding any customer, finding the perfect customer?
Um, I am very much a student of the kind of finance side of things, the fundraising side of things. I think it's really important when you raise funds to very quickly align everybody, especially like your founder, co-founders, on like where do we need to get to by the time we have to go raise our next round. And that's not necessarily revenue, that's not necessarily number of customers, but I think it's how do we support the narrative that our new partners, our new investors are gonna get excited about. And so I think a lot of it revolves around what we were talking about with like product market fit. Because when you go from seed to A and then obviously, to B, it's you have an engine, you have an assembly line, and you just need to scale it, right? Because it's easy to convince a couple people to join the mission. Like everybody has an entrepreneurial you know, perspective and they have appreciation for being an entrepreneur, but finding something that a large market needs that you can repeatedly go and find customers, tell them your story, and bring them on as a customer and make them happy like that can take a couple of years. Um, and so just making sure you're thoughtful in how much capital you have for you to get through that learning experience, I think is how we think about it.
Yeah. And you bringing it back to the ICP, I wanted to ask, how did you go about that?
We just talked to a ton of customers and tried to find patterns within what we were hearing. So for us, our ideal customer profile is any organization with 5,000 to 15,000 employees. And cybersecurity is increasingly becoming like a very broad market problem. And so it's good and bad. Like it's not vertical based. It's just based on the size of the organization. And there are a few like technology indicators of like what technologies do they use that lead us to believe they're the right ICP. But yeah, no, it very much like trial error. Talk to as many people as you can. Look for patterns. And so yeah, I mean, honestly, it's just getting active, getting out there, talking to people.
Hmm. Were there any like initial hypotheses going in, and then did any of that change through some of those discussions?
Yeah, I mean, so the main outcome of Realm and what we do is to save people money. And that's like a direct ROI. So what we really do is we call it a security fabric, but the simple way to think about it is we standardize ingestion of all security telemetry and security logs, and then use data science and AI to eliminate non-security relevant data so that security teams aren't paying for the process, compute, and storage of that data. And so there's an existing incumbent in the space that has been doing this for 5 years, and they focused on the Fortune 1000. We felt like there was an opportunity to like democratize it and bring it to the broader market, and do that through AI and leverage AI to really make it turnkey easy so people who don't have resources can use it. I think the thing that we made an assumption about was how far down market we could go. And I think what we realized is like, a 10% cost savings for a customer who has a $20,000, cost for their storage, isn't as compelling as, 20% savings for somebody who has a $200,000 deployment, for example. And so I think it was like, there's some diminishing returns on those savings as you go down market. And so I think it wasn't a mistake. All right. Cause it's like, that feels like it was wrong, but I think that was something we learned was like, there is a sweet spot where they need to have enough data and enough cost for cost savings to be of interest to dedicate time and attention and all that. So, That was, I think one lesson learned.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds like a good one, and it sounds like one of those areas that, it's easy to look back and say, hindsight's 2020 and say, well, of course there's going to be kind of the sweet spot based on all of that, but that is not obvious at all at the outset. And so, like your point about you have to talk to customers, you have to kind of see how they react to, you know, what the product does, and the ROI, and just all the different types of messages that go into these kind of sales conversations, that we learn from.
Yeah, totally. And there's also like, just like incorporating AI is great. Like people are very excited by it, but it can also bring like concern or wanting to understand at a deeper level what you're doing because there are implications for their data and privacy and all those things. So, building that muscle memory to help explain and get people comfortable, I think was something that we knew was going to be important, but I think we were surprised at the level we needed to like communicate what we were doing. Because people, want to use AI, but they just don't want to do something that's going to jeopardize their company. So
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I was going to ask a similar or a question around that is, how do you find that right balance of, talking about AI versus not as part of your story? And, last month we had the cybersecurity conference, RSA, maybe a little bit more than a month by now, but where AI was everywhere, and, for good reason. But then how does the buyer really understand kind of what's truly underpinning the solution? And making sure that that doesn't sound like just buzzwords, right? But that you're kind of truly talking about what the solution does and how it works. And then using AI as your differentiator when you have that in your offering, but recognizing that there can be kind of backlash in some cases. I was talking to a CEO that specifically was not introducing that into their messaging at all, because their experience was that it would take a sales cycle from, 3 months to 9 months, just the additional like fear and risk. And even if, all of that had already been taken care of in the platform, um, there's kind of a lot of moving parts to that.
there's a lot of truth to that too. Like when certain organizations are putting a lot of guardrails in place from like a data privacy and security for good reason. And
Right.
so you do need to be thoughtful. I think for us, we tend to focus more on the outcomes and like less about using AI. The AI support the outcome, but it's not about AI. And then I think the other thing is like AI can mean like a million different things, right? There's like data science, there's machine learning, there's LLMs. And so, um, I think trying to be very prescriptive when you do talk about AI to reference specifically what you're doing, because you're kind of short circuiting the inevitable question of like, what does that mean? And so, trying to think 2, 3 questions down, so that when you are messaging it, it's more clear and tangible to the customer, I think is important. I think the other thing is, um, there can be use of AI to develop a better product, and then there can be use of AI by the customer to have a better experience. And I think what we've seen from customers is they're much more comfortable with you using AI to more rapidly build a product that never has any implications of their data. But once they're using AI with their data, that tends to throw up more red flags. And so that's kind of what I was, I guess, trying to say, which is like, if you can be prescriptive in how you're using it, with the lens of like, people are excited, but they're also cautious. I think that's something we're trying to be better at.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think your point about, thinking 2, 3 steps ahead, is really the smartest way to go about it, so that it's not just, let's answer this question, but let's think about it in the broader context of their organization and what we know we need to help clients through for them to be successful and all of that.
Yeah, totally. Exactly.
Pete, I would love to shift gears a little bit and learn a little bit more about you. So, can you tell me a little bit about, who you were as a child? How did you get um, from your childhood to where you are now? Did you know you'd be in cybersecurity and sales and, starting a company someday?
Yeah. So I am the proud son of a fishmonger. My dad had the same job and stayed at the same company for 45 years. And so I grew up seeing him leave the house at 4:30 in the morning and come home at 7. And, I think for me that instilled like, the importance of working hard. And, keeping a smile on your face and, almost like viewing it as like an exciting journey and like, being thankful for just what you have and the opportunity you have. And so that's kind of the backdrop that I view things. I was, I'd say, um, not the best student. Just to put, I guess to put it bluntly, I was very much like a C student, and I had a hard time connecting like why why what I was learning would be important later in life. And so I think I was a little bit of a slow starter, and I kind of realized when I was like 18, I was like, oh, you kind of messed around for 4 6 years, and you kind of need to get your shit together to an extent. And so yeah, so I got into this. Just based on luck, doing an internship that I found with Rapid Seven, and I think the one thing that my dad always tried to instill in me is like find a situation or a career where there's an equal return on effort. Because if you value hard work and if you value being able to put in a lot of time and effort, as long as you are compensated or have an equal sized outcome, like that's exciting and that makes it easier to want to work hard. And so that's a bit about me. I think the other thing is first time parent. My wife and I just had our first child about a year ago. Um, and so that's, it's like that in a startup, it's just like a never ending humble pie, but it's a ton of fun. And I think, I'm still learning this, but I think anybody who has a child will say that once you have a child, you have a much stronger sense of empathy for what it takes to raise a human being. And everybody on the earth had somebody who cared about them and took care of them. And so I think it puts things in perspective. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a bit about me. Um, I'm a student of the game in a variety of ways, one being a startup and one being a parent.
Yep, yep. Two things that you're kind of shepherding forward from nothing or nearly nothing. I can definitely empathize with that. My son was born maybe 2 years, maybe a little bit less from when I started my firm. So I felt like I was like building this company, like raising this company, and then the baby and kind of raising that. And it does give you a different perspective. Just as maybe a silly example, but grocery stores, you'd see like a kid throwing a tantrum, and my maybe judgmental reaction was, what's wrong with these parents? Why can't they control their child? And then as soon as you have a child, you say, oh, poor parents, what they must be going through today, and all of that. So it's just a small example, but I think that empathy kind of permeates from like day-to-day interactions to bigger things, to understanding like your employees with kids might be facing
Yeah.
something different, and you talked about that earlier. So kind of bubbles up and down the ladder.
Yeah, seeing new parents on a plane with a baby, like the view of things totally changes because you realize like how little control you have in how a child acts or behaves, and especially in the early days because they're babies. So yeah, what you said, totally agree.
Yep, yep. I've been on those flights, and then I've also been the parent on that flight with the screaming baby from a long flight home from DC to Boston. Never felt so long.
We haven't done it yet. But yeah, no, I've previously I had the baby be crying the whole flight, and you're just like going like this, and you get annoyed, but then like once you have to deal with it, you're a lot more empathy.
Yeah, yeah. How wonderful. Um, I wanted to ask a little bit more, thinking about your company and where you are today. You've talked a bit about kind of the ICP and the kinds of problems you're solving. What do you think are the biggest things that are kind of facing your customers as far as kind of a transformation that they need to think differently about, how they kind of work in and around the security space?
Yeah, that's a good question. Security's changed so much. Like it used to be this like discipline within IT, and then it's become it's like fully dedicated market, and it's very noisy. And so I it's really hard to be a customer because there's a million different messages coming at you from a million different directions, and trying to figure out what's the right thing in technology for your company, depending where they're at maturity wise. Um, I think I think for us, we're trying to invest more in the first experiences a customer has with us, as far as being able to listen and get them answers on how the technology works. And so I think for us, there's this concept of like go-to-market engineering, where instead of having as much focus on business development, lead gen, BDRs, SDRs, you invest a little bit more in technical resources that are there for the first conversation. And so trying to, very quickly help customers determine if you're the right fit for them, as opposed to trying to tell everybody you're the right fit for them. Because that's definitely not the truth. And so I think that's one thing. I
That's a
don't know.
really good one. I do love that. I'm curious, like go-to-market engineering isn't a term I've heard in that way. Is that something you use? Is that kind of sales engineering? Is there a broader purview on that?
There's a company, Clay. Have you heard of Clay?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so they kind of like pioneered this like go-to-market engineering concept. And I think part of it is they sell go-to-market solutions. And so, it's, I mean, at the end of the day, they're just like words, right? But like the concept is trying to very quickly get customers, knowledged, individuals who can help them decide what to do, what not to do, and if you can help solve their problem. And I think it's obviously, all around serving the customer, but I do think there's like a subcomponent, which is if people feel like you value their time and you help them get to a quick answer, there's a much higher propensity for them to want to come back and talk to you. And so like even if it's not the right thing for right now, like having the view of your brand and the view of your company be one of, being really thoughtful and respectful of people's time, I think like inevitably down the road it should pay off. And hopefully that customer who wasn't a good fit at the time, when they do have a need that you can help solve, like is excited to come back to you. And so I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if it pays off. But I think that's the thesis.
Yeah, I think it does eventually pay off, and just feels better, right? So if you're like leading from a place of like leading in line with your values and transparency and honesty and building strong client relationships, like all of those things, if that matters to you, then I think you kind of have to do that. I like that you're kind of inserting that go-to-market engineering very early in the process, because I think that can be hard for a startup to do, especially if you're turning people away because you realize maybe you're not the perfect fit for one another. But ultimately, like that's how you create loyal customers. That's how you decrease churn. That's how you create the advocates. And we've seen that in our own business as well. Um, I think it can be hard to kind of hold yourself to that, but it sounds like you're really designing that kind of from the ground up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we got a long way to go. But I think you hit on something really good, which kind of connects back to the convo we were having around like top of the funnel. And so, like we still do say this is like whether or not you know it, every deal or every customer you acquire at some point did a reference call. Like there's always some form of reference that happens. Maybe they talk to a peer, or they talk to a reseller or a technology partner. Um, and so I think just as we're talking, I think that the dots that we're connecting is if you can make your experience really good and drive the advocacy, which is what you said, it doesn't totally alleviate the need for lead gen and top of the funnel, but it's like a sub benefit, which is like you're trying to use that as a way to get people to sell on your behalf, I guess. I don't know if that's a good way
Yeah,
to.
yeah. I think giving you kind of a good reputation in the market all around, whether it's a customer or a prospect you just spoke with once but left them with a good impression, I think it is so important. And your point about the references is a really important one, right? One way or another, people are doing their homework. Glassdoor has actually become one of my favorites, and not looking at kind of candidates, right? But
Mm.
uh, really seeing what you can learn from that, because you can go to G2 and you can go to all the kind of typical sources to see what our customers are saying, but that's often an area where you can tell more about the leadership and things that um, are maybe not always the obvious ones to be looking at, but they can be very telling about an organization.
Oh, interesting. So like you're saying, like, before you buy a solution or engage with a vendor, go into Glassdoor and just see what they're
Mhm.
on. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
great.
which is not like what it's designed for, but
Right.
I think for that reason, you can sometimes get kind of a fuller picture of what the company's like.
That's such a good idea. I love that.
Well, Pete, I know we don't have too much time left. I'd love to maybe ask you an introspective question as we wrap up. And knowing what you know now, what advice would you have given your younger self in your first ever leadership role? Like if you were sitting in a room with yourself.
If I just only one, if I had to give one,
You're allowed to give more than one if you really want to.
I mean, I think the number one thing is just like don't grab the steering wheel so tight. I think like there's, it's good to be ambitious and it's good to have passion and excitement. But I think if you just are only focused on going forward, it's hard to appreciate the present. And so I think for me early in my career, maybe not took things too seriously, but I think almost had like an intertwining of like who I was as a person and who I was in my job and career. Um, and as you have a child and as you start to have, memorable experiences in your life, like being able to be present, I think is something that I could have done a better job at. So I kind of leave the job at the door. It's important to be passionate, but just like not grabbing the steering wheel too tight is, I think, something that I'm really focused on trying to be better about.
Yeah, I love that. I think for me, being more present is a focus, and I think a lifelong work in progress.
Totally, exactly.
Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for everything that you shared with us. And if our listeners want to reach out to you, connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I'd say reach out on LinkedIn, connect, send a message. Always good to network and try and learn from others.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, this is fun. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to our listeners. So if today gave you any new ideas or valuable insights, and I'm sure that it did, please share this with someone. We know that spreading this kind of knowledge and information really helps us all grow as leaders, learn from one another, and drive successful innovation and transformation in our organizations. So thank you again, Pete. Loved the conversation. And this has been another great discussion on Shift and Thrive. I'll see you all next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.